Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us for Finding Calm in the Chaos, 5 Strategies for Reducing Stress. I'm Greg Berry, Director of Communications in the Office of Alumni Affairs. Since we're virtual, please excuse technical issues that may pop up. And if you have problems with your video or audio, click the reconnect button to get back to the webinar right away. As we begin, I want to ask a quick question, and it's a very simple question. Just how stressed are you on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being low stress, 10 to being very stressed? How stressed are you? We're starting to get people voting at this point, and it's across the board. We'll leave that poll up for a few moments so you can submit your responses. And a note to our live attendees, we are recording today's webinar. Replay will be uploaded on our website by tomorrow. I hope to get to it this afternoon. Once the link is ready, you'll get an email stating it is. Also, if you have a question for today's guest, drop it in the chat. We'll have time for Q&A at the end. And I still see things jockeying a little bit around. I'm noticing that it looks like the majority of our audience has selected 6, 7, or 8. So they're kind of mildly stressed, I would say. Just roughly a third have picked 7 out of 10. I'm going to go ahead in that poll right now. And we are so excited to have Dr. Dayna Watson back as a guest to our webinar series. Dr. Watson, once we get that slide up, is now Associate Professor of Human Studies in the School of Education and Human Sciences. Congratulations on that move. She completed her PhD in counseling and counselor education from the University of Florida. Dr. Watson has extensive experience in training in clinical supervision and mental health counseling. You may remember her from a previous webinar. She presented mental health and young athletes, stress, eating disorders, and more last August. You can find that on our YouTube channel as well as our videos page on our website. At this time, I would like to formally welcome Dr. Watson back to our webinar series. Thanks again for joining us and being with us.
Great. Thank you so much for having me back. I'm excited for the opportunity.
You're so welcome, and the show is yours.
All right, thank you. So poll was really helpful. I think it's good for us to always kind of think about where are we starting with the topic, especially when it comes to something like stress. And so I want to say up front, and I'll talk about this a little bit later too, 2 things. One, I am here because I do have some expertise in this area, but I am also here as a human being, as a fellow traveler in this world, who is looking for my own ways to figure out how to find some calm in the chaos. And so there'll be a blending here of expertise and maybe even some of my own practices as I'm trying to find my way in this kind of stressful, intense world we live in. The other thing I want to say is that in this day and age in social media, and just the mass media that's available, you're maybe at this webinar thinking, I've read 5,000 articles and I've seen 700 TikTok posts and I've done all of these things about how to find stress. And so I want to start us off by just saying, like, let's settle our minds a little bit on this, that there are a million different things that could help you achieve kind of your optimal level of wellness. And you are in the driver's seat of that. So my hope today is that we talk some about, just the general things, what to look for, areas to consider when it comes to wellness and stress. I'll talk very briefly about burnout as well. But really by the end of today, you'll have some practical strategies, either strategies to use or a good concrete plan for how you can figure out your own personal goals and strategies when it comes to wellness and stress reduction. So what are our objectives for this webinar? One is just to understand the different components of a person's overall wellness. So when we talk about stress, when we talk about anxiety, when we talk about mental health in general, it's important to understand that wellness is kind of a holistic thing, that it's pretty rare in my experiences that someone has high stress and there's only one component, there's only one thing. Like, yes, we can have situations, like maybe there's a really significant work situation, but generally speaking, when we find ourselves struggling with stress and our world feels really chaotic, I think there's probably more than one area we really need to look at. So we're going to talk about the different components that make up a person's general wellness. And then we're going to also talk about some of the signs and symptoms of stress and burnout. So how we kind of assess each of those areas to ensure that we're really getting a good picture and an understanding of what's going on for us. And then we are going to, towards the end, focus some on 5, like what I would call starting strategies. So if you really feel like you're really searching and trying to figure out, I've got to do something. My stress is too high. I've got to figure something out. We're going to talk about 5 really starting strategies. And then we're going to wrap up by saying like, okay, if you start these 5 and you need something else, how do I figure out what else I need to do? And so there's maybe like a little 6th strategy of like how to identify and weed through the millions and millions of strategies that you may have already read about or heard about, or kind, well-meaning people maybe have suggested along the way. So that's what I hope to get accomplished in the next, 40, 45 minutes or so, with a little bit of time at the end to address any questions you put in the chat as well. So let's talk about individual wellness. And like I said, I think it's important, for us to not just think about here's specific things that I'm stressed about, but think about our well-being overall. And so wellness really is on a continuum. We believe wellness is on a continuum. And so we all have these components, which I'll talk about in a minute. And just think of it as kind of like this sliding continuum, that maybe in this one area, I'm more on the healthy side. And then in this other area, I'm more on the stress side. And all of these components together are what actually creates our well-being, or our perceived sense of well-being, and how stressed we are. So what areas, when we're thinking about evaluating our stress level, if I'm thinking about, looking at that poll, if I'm saying I'm a 7 or an 8, which is probably pretty high, right? 10 is like panic and chaos, crisis probably. 7 or 8, pretty intense, I would say, for a normal day, right? So what are the areas that I need to consider when I'm trying to figure out what is it that really has me stressed? And so there are a lot of different philosophies, theoretical approaches for understanding the components of individual wellness. I've taken the liberty here to just kind of combine a few models and create kind of what I think is just kind of a basic understanding of some areas to consider. So I like to talk about wellness and about stress like a 3-legged stool. Okay. So if you are, you've got one of those stools, like a bar stool kind of thing, right? And it's got 3 different legs. And let's say that those 3 legs represent these elements of wellness. Okay. So if 2 of those legs are strong, sturdy, the length they need to be, and 1 of those legs is about an inch too short, so maybe not even a lot too short, just an inch, can you sit on that stool? No, not comfortably, right? Because just that little inch, just that little discrepancy between the 2 kind of sturdy, good legs and that 1 leg that's just a little bit too short is enough to disrupt the balance of the entire stool, to the point that you probably can't sit on it at all. Or if you do, it's a struggle. You may find yourself, trying to balance with your core muscles, or keeping 1 leg on the ground, or whatever it is that you need to do to make sure that you stay upright on your wellness stool, so to speak. So what are the components of individual wellness? And so knowing what the components are, again, helps us figure out where are our stressors coming from and what strategies might work the best. So the first component of wellness I want to talk about is your body, okay? So we know there's decades and decades of research evidence about the connection between our physical health and our emotional well-being, our minds and our bodies. And so we need to assess our wellness. That's not the only thing. It's possible to be in the top shape of your life physically and still be kind of a disaster when it comes to your emotional health. So it's not the only thing, but it is one thing. So when we think about our body, we are thinking about, our nutrition, our medical, care, our medical health. We're thinking about our exercise. We're thinking about our ability to physically do what it is that we want to do. This is also where you find sleep. So like, is my body getting enough rest to recharge and repair itself? So thinking about physically, where is my wellness? And in a minute, I'm going to give you a second to kind of just assess for yourself each of these areas, but I want to give kind of some definitions first. The second component of wellness to think about is our mind. Okay. And so when I think about our mind, I'm really here thinking more about our emotions and our cognitions, kind of our perceived experience, right? So where am I? So if I'm rating myself as an 8 on how stressed I am, do I have just these constant worries, right? Or do I feel peace? Like, do I have some sense of peace? And maybe I'm feeling really well in my mind. Do I have feelings of depression? Is my mind just scattered and distracted? So like, how am I feeling in my mind? The third area is your spirit or your spirituality. And so this can look different for different people. But there's an element here of like, how am I feeling about my spiritual self, my spirituality? So this doesn't necessarily mean like adherence to a specific religion, but a lot can fall into here. How am I feeling kind of connected to humanity as a whole? If I do have specific spiritual beliefs or faith beliefs, how am I feeling connected to my faith community or in my own like practices and observances? So like my spirituality, my understanding of how I kind of fit into the world is part of my wellness. Relationships and family. So we can't really talk about individual wellness without recognizing that we are beings who live in communities and groups, right? And so how healthy are my relationships? Do I have enough relationships? How healthy is my family? Am I satisfied with how my relationships are going? Community. So this is not just about engagement in your community, but kind of how healthy is your community? Are you in a situation where your neighborhood is safe or is it not safe? Do you feel like you have a place in your community or do you feel like an outsider? And so again, just thinking about this is a continuum. So where am I on this continuum? Is this a place where I feel well? Is this a place where I'm feeling some stress? Finances. I've talked to, I don't even know how many clients over all the years. And then, moving into advising and supervising students. And man, is finances a place where we can really struggle with stress? I think especially now, everything we hear on the news is gloom and doom about the economy and the interest rates and the housing market and the job market and, everything's terrible. And so there's some drama to that, right? Because they're selling ads and doing the things that, media does. But also there are many of us who are experiencing real financial strain with the, inflation of grocery prices and maybe some worries about, it's an election year. So like what's going to happen with the economy based on that? And so there can be a lot of concern around our personal finances and kind of the state of the economy and how that is going. Next area of wellness to consider is work, and I say and or academic. So kind of from a stance of your occupation, or if you're a student, your academic pursuits, your intellectual pursuits would kind of all fall under here. And so how are you doing with that? The part of your brain that's working, your working brain, your thinking brain, your intellectual brain. How is your wellness there? Or is that an area of stress where a job is a big stress, or maybe you're unemployed and so there's financial stress and there's work stress. And so considering that component. And the last is hobbies and interests. And I think we forget sometimes that is part of our wellness. It's on the bottom of the list, and sometimes it's not on the list at all because we spend a lot of time thinking about these other things and not necessarily recognizing that. I think generally it's accepted that as a human being, you need to have some kind of interest and outlet. So for some people, they may find like that they don't know. I don't know what I'm interested in, or I don't have any hobbies, or I've kind of lost myself. I've worked a lot with women who their children are getting older and maybe moving out of the house, like empty nesting. And then they're like, I don't know what my interests. I'm having to kind of refigure that out, like what my hobbies are, what my interests are. I haven't, done a lot socially or recreationally for 18 years. And now suddenly I'm trying to figure out what I like. And so when we're thinking about wellness, we need to think about all those components. So I'd like you to take a second here, and I want you to assess your own wellness in each of these areas. And so this is just, there's not some magic formula here. You can score yourself if you want to. I find that can be easy. That poll at the beginning of kind of how stressed are you is a great example of this. And so maybe asking, how well am I? How well am I feeling in each of these areas? And my body, 1 to 10, 1 being very unwell and 10 being like as well as you can imagine physically. Where do you rate yourself? In my mind, my heart and my emotions and my cognitions, my mental health, how would I rank myself? 1, I'm really, really struggling in this area. This is an area of difficulty. 10, I got this. I'm mentally strong. I'm emotionally strong. This is not an area for me. Spirituality. Am I feeling connected to my spiritual self? Do I know what that even means? 1 to 10, where am I spiritually? And maybe you can make some notes of this as we're walking through it. If you're not, in your car, don't do that if you're in your car. And so where am I? Relationships and family. Okay, what's my wellness like there? 1, it's a complete train wreck, dumpster fire, whatever euphemism or metaphor you want to use here. Or 10, relationships and family are strong. This is an area that's well for me. Community. How am I feeling about how I fit into the community? How is my community doing? 1 to 10. Finances. Where am I with this? Am I also feeling the gloom and doom of the economy, or am I feeling okay and secure here? Work and academics. Am I where I want to be occupationally? Am I satisfied in this area? And then hobbies and interests. Again, 1, I got nothing. I don't have any hobbies or interests. And 10, I'm feeling solid. I've got a plan for hobbies and interests. And so if you had a chance to kind of jot some of those things down, maybe hold on to them, because once we get towards the end, we're going to see, hey, where might be some areas for you to consider some new strategies for decreasing your stress. And so at this point, you may be thinking like, man, I thought this was about stress, and she's talking a lot about wellness, right? And so there's an assumption here that we have to remember, that as our wellness increases, our stress should decrease, right? So if it's a continuum, that if we're thinking about ways to boost our wellness, then that is going to reduce our stress and our anxiety. But let's talk about what warning signs are there. So if I've assessed and I'm looking at my list and I'm like, whoo, I'm hitting a 3 or a 4, in these 3 areas, or maybe I'm at a 5 across the board, which doesn't feel great to me right now. Or maybe I'm, at a 1 in one of these areas, and that's really a pain point for me. I want us to talk a little bit about what are some of the warning signs. So I want to pause here, because I think it's a little bit tricky when we talk about stress and anxiety. I think sometimes there's a kind of a myth that the goal is to not have stress or anxiety. And I just want to kind of bust that myth right now, because it's just not possible. I hate to be the person to say that if you were holding on to that myth, that there's some magical formula to not feel stressed. It's really not possible. I think for a lot of reasons. 1, we don't have to not have any stress at all to be okay. So I want you to hear that first. The goal is to manage stress and to limit our stress and to not feel like our stress is in control of us. It's not that we would never have stress again, because the reality is, like, we face difficult circumstances. And so the idea that we would just not ever feel stressed about difficult circumstances is just really unrealistic, right? And also, I want you to be a complete human being. I'm a counselor, so you'll have to bear with me on this, but as a counselor, as your semi-counselor for this 1 hour, I want you to be a human being who has a complete range of emotional experiences, because that's what humans are supposed to have. Okay. So that means we have stress when things are stressful, but that the stress doesn't have us. Okay. And so we do have to have some tolerance, and each of us may tolerate differently. Like for me personally, I can tolerate like a 5 out of the 10. And that feels, I have some, situations in my life that are kind of intense. And so a level 5 stress for me is, that's manageable. That feels reasonable to me. When I start getting at a 7 or an 8, that starts to feel unreasonable. That's when I start to maybe have some of these warning signs we're going to talk about. And so I want to help you kind of clue in to the physical and mental signs that your stress may be getting outside of that tolerance range. Okay. So I want you to take a minute to think about what are your own telltale signs that you're stressed. Okay. Physically in your body, how do you know? How might your behavior change? How does your relationship change? How do you know that you're maybe not doing great, or that you're on the path to not doing great? Okay. Because this can present a little bit differently for each person. So how do I know? Do I have a tell, right? Is there something that, like, when I see that happen, it's like, look, I'm going down that route. I'm going down that route. Like, so for me, I can tell certain spots that I keep tension in my body. Yes, I see a good comment here. Your heart rate goes up. You get emotional. You may start to panic. I start to feel muscle tension. I have this, I don't know if you've ever had this sensation. I realize that I sometimes hold tension in my muscles without even really realizing it. And then when I lay down at night, it's like I'm sore, like and I'm like, what did I do today? Like I'm a professor. Okay. I'm not like a construction worker. I shouldn't be physically sore at the end of my workday. That's weird. Right. But it's the muscle tension. And so I see other people saying knots in my shoulder. So yes, that physical sensation in your body. When I start lashing out, right. Yeah. So relational kind of emotional volatility. Super tired. Yeah. So like you're maybe even sleeping, but you still feel really tired. Poor sleep, unable to think, clenching jaws. Yes, I definitely have that one. I noticed the other day, my jaw was like not opening all the way. It's kind of locked up, that's definitely not good. Watch out for that. Headaches. Absolutely. I snack more. Yeah. We're looking for that dopamine hit. And probably not snacking on steamed broccoli, right? We're snacking on things that have high simple carbohydrates, because it gives us that little pick me up that we're looking for. Headache, shoulder, neck strain. I require more sleep. Absolutely. So you sleep problems, right? You need more sleep, but maybe you're not sleeping as well. Growing gray hair. I'm feeling you on that one. Irritability, lose train of thought. Yeah. So like distraction, forgetfulness, irritated, kind of snappy, gain weight. Yeah. Cause you're like eating more, again, trying to get that little relief, right? It's natural to get some relief. Want to get some relief from that. Someone says all the above. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Procrastination, dissociation. Yeah. So like kind of numbing out, right? Doom scrolling, is that what they call it now? Where you just get on and suddenly you're like, I've spent 2 hours, looking at pointless TikTok videos. Increase in my chocolate intake. Yes. Lots of us will do that. So all of us, several of you on here have some really, great insight into your own body and when you start to see those things. And so one real key component of managing our stress and chaos is being able to recognize when we're starting to kind of go over the edge to where we don't want to be. And so here's just some things to potentially look out for. All the things that you're talking about, definitely on the list. So trouble sleeping. So this can be either you don't feel rested, like your quality of sleep changes. It can be trouble falling asleep. It can be trouble staying asleep, waking up multiple times at night. Some folks have a little bit of sleep avoidance, actually, where it's like you're wasting all this time. Again, like doom scrolling, eating snacks at midnight instead of going to bed. Increased irritability or anger. So several of you mentioned that. So it's this feeling of just being kind of a tight fuse. Like if one more thing, if one more thing happens, I was driving with my daughter the other day and we were actually joking about this before the webinar starts that, it's a great, UAB is always growing and developing and new buildings going up. But one of the perhaps downsides of that is that you never really know when you commute into your office, when you're going to pull on the street that you normally pull onto and it's going to be like closed. And you're like, okay, I drove here yesterday. I can't drive here today. What's the deal? And so I was driving on campus. My daughter was actually with me and, I was feeling the strain, was probably not processing it as I need to. And got hemmed up with all these cars who were like confused about where to go. Cause like suddenly there was like a one lane where there were 3 lanes before and it was just a mess. And I was just like, so I said out loud, as we do, I mean, I'm being transparent here. I was just like, man, I don't have it in me today to deal with this. That's what I said. And my daughter was like, Mom, it's just driving the car. Now she's 7, so she doesn't never experienced road rage before. And she's, probably never experienced that much stress, right? I hope not, if I'm doing, my job as a parent. But she was like, I don't have it in me. So there's this feeling of like, I don't have capacity, right? So either I don't have it in me to be patient. I don't have it in me to regulate my own emotions. Like I'm going to cry. I don't have it in me to navigate or manage another difficult situation or even minor inconvenience. Like, yeah, I can't do it. I just can't do it. I can't finish what I need to do. I can't make a decision. I can't do it. So you may have difficulty making decisions, even little simple things. And that's as simple as like, I saw probably doom scrolling, honestly, on Instagram the other day, a meme that was like, I didn't realize that, being an adult meant you have to decide what to eat for dinner for like every day for the rest of your life until you die. Right. And so it's like, literally you can just pour a bowl of cereal, but when you're really feeling stressed and you're really feeling the strain of your life and you don't have areas of wellness that are helping to kind of protect you a little bit, something as simple as like figuring out what to eat for dinner can feel really overwhelming. It can be like, I can't do it. Like someone just tell me what to eat. Someone just tell me what to eat. I don't want to think about it. You may find yourself making multiple mistakes, way more than is typical. So nobody's perfect. Everyone makes mistakes. But what you may find is like, I forgot, like, a few weeks ago, I was like beating myself up over it because I missed the deadline to pay the remaining balance for one of my daughter's summer camps. And there was so much going on. And it was like a random Monday at 5 p.m. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did this. What's wrong with me? Whatever. It was fine. I paid it 2 hours later and she's at camp right now as we speak. But you may find yourself making mistakes that you're like, I can do this. I can write an email, right? I can do this data entry. I can make this cake recipe that I've made 300 times. But when you're really in a bad place with the stress, you may see yourself making multiple mistakes. Look out for increased numbing with food, alcohol, and drugs. And so I use the phrase here about numbing because in some ways when we're stressed, food and alcohol and drugs can have a similar impact. I mentioned it earlier. We're looking for kind of that hint, that little hit of dopamine, like a little happy chemical, whether that is like, I'm going to numb out and I'm going to have, 3 glasses of wine instead of 1 glass of wine on a Monday night, or maybe it's drugs. Maybe it's, the little extra chocolate, or maybe it's a lot of extra chocolate, or maybe it's even binge eating. Some individuals struggle with binge eating. And so just paying attention to like, am I doing things to make my body physically feel good temporarily, but they're not healthy things to do. A big component of stress and anxiety is what we kind of classify in a big sense as avoiding behavior. So a classic part of anxiety is avoidance. And so it's this idea of like, this thing's really terrible and overwhelming, whatever it is. And so in order to not have to deal with that, I'm just going to avoid it. Okay. So that may mean, that can mean a lot of things. That could mean not returning phone calls. I need to return all these phone calls and I just can't deal with it. I'm not going to return the phone call. It may mean, missing work, and sometimes taking a mental health day is good, right? Taking some time off to rest. But sometimes I'm missing work because I just can't face it. And it's too stressful at work. So I'm just not going to go. It can be that numbing. It can be procrastination. It can be, wasting a bunch of time on Netflix or TikTok or whatever. I keep mentioning TikTok. I don't know what I have against TikTok today. Netflix, no offense if you love TikTok. Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu, all of us have our preferred streaming or whatever it is. And so we may just use those things to avoid. Or we may do little things, depending on your personality type. Some of us may do 400 things on our to-do list, except the one thing that we need to do. And it's because that one thing feels really overwhelming. And then physical symptoms, the last one to think about. And so really paying attention to physical symptoms. And so we know that our body has a neurobiological response to stress. So there's something that happens in our brain and it activates our endocrine system. And it's a whole body experience when we're truly in a stress response. And so our cortisol levels increase, our breathing can be more rapid, our body uses more energy from our food, like consumes our food nutrients a little bit faster. So all of those processes kind of turn on and crank on when our brain is feeling that stress and we're in one of those kind of stress loops in our brain. And so the physical symptoms are related to a lot of the things that we talked about here, that muscle tension, headaches, jaw clenching. You may have shortness of breath or feeling kind of like hurried and out of breath. I will put a note here, like just be sure if you're having some symptoms like that related to shortness of breath, or you feel like your heart is palpitating. It is absolutely possible that heart palpitations and shortness of breath are a stress response, but they also can be signs of a serious medical condition. So be sure that if you're having that, especially if you're having it, more than once, it wasn't just like, oh, I just had a really stressful job meeting and my heart rate's high afterwards or whatever, that you're getting checked out medically, because we want to make sure that we've cleared anything that could really be dangerous. So stress is not good for you. And we'll talk in a minute about some long-term and short-term health outcomes from stress, but it's not always like immediately dangerous, but there are some of those symptoms that can. So this is just always my caveat. It's the same thing I would tell my clients who come in for anxiety. Make sure you're medically cleared. Like if you've got something going on, shortness of breath, high heart rate, whatever, just make sure you're getting checked out for that. And so that you can address it as it needs to be addressed. If it's a heart or a physical issue, we need to address it that way. If it's a stress issue, we want to make sure we do it that way. All right. So a quick note about burnout. So I'm not going to talk extensively about burnout here, but I think when we think about stress, stress and burnout are often kind of partnered together. Burnout is actually related to your occupation. It's an occupational phenomenon. So you may be feeling really stressed and also be burned out, which is that work component. You also may be really stressed and not be burned out. And so it's really outside of the scope of the webinar today to talk a ton about work burnout, because that's a little bit of a different conversation. A lot of the signs and symptoms can be the same. And so, when you're assessing yourself in those areas of wellness and you're looking at that occupation, work, academic life one, this may be a place where you're like, okay, is this really stress or am I having some burnout here? Burnout is typically the result of chronic stress and strain at work that's either not well managed or it's so chronic because of the work environment that it exceeds a person's capacity to tolerate. Okay, so if that's a situation like, if you're truly burned out at work, again, that's a little bit of a separate conversation. Some of these other strategies about managing your stress aren't necessarily going to solve a true work burnout scenario. So if you think that's maybe you want to be sure to seek out some additional resources to really assess that burnout, like that occupational burnout. And so that may include talking to a professional counselor. Oh, great. Yes. They just put a link in the chat for a previous webinar that was specifically about career burnout. So definitely check that out. I also want to say here too, that all of these strategies that we're going to talk about, because we're about to shift into strategies in a minute, are really important and really useful. And also don't forget that there are people who it's their job to help people manage and be well. So if you're trying strategies and you're like, I'm not making any progress, seek out counseling. This is definitely something that you can do through counseling. You may have employee assistants at your work. If you work at UAB, we definitely have employee assistants. You can seek somebody out through your insurance company, whatever that looks like, but be sure to get professional help if you feel like you're at a point where I can't manage these. I've got all the strategies, I'm using the strategies, but it's still not happening. So why is managing your stress important? One is, like I said earlier, I'm going to be your counselor for just a second here. I want you to have a robust human experience, right? I want you to be able to function and live in a full emotional experience. And we can't do that if we're too heavy laden with stress. The other reason this is important is that we know stress and burnout have short-term and long-term negative impacts on your health, including your physical health. So stress is not just something that messes with your mind, it can mess with your body too. So individuals who have high levels of stress, especially toxic stress that's not managed over time, are at a greater risk for many heart disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes, several chronic type illnesses. And if you already have a medical disorder of some kind, a lot of medical disorders can be exacerbated by high stress. So again, there's that mind-body connection here of wellness that we need to make sure we understand. I want you to make sure you understand, and that we're taking a holistic approach to understanding how can I be as well as I can in my physical body, in my heart, in my finances, in my mind, in my spirituality, etc. So what are the strategies, right? So again, note here, I think in some ways having so much information at the tips of our fingers, at our smartphones and our laptops and whatever that is great. And I think there's a lot of good information out there that people are getting that they maybe wouldn't have gotten otherwise. I think the other side of that is there's just so much information. So if you're already feeling stressed and overwhelmed, and then you're trying to Google how to not be stressed and overwhelmed, you're going to feel more stressed and overwhelmed because there's too many things out there. And so I want you to narrow down and think about 5 things that you can do really right away. 5 things you can practice right away. And then we'll talk about building on that. But it's important to start with small, measurable steps. So how am I going to make these 5 changes? Or maybe you're already doing 2 of them and you're going to add the other 3, whatever that looks like for you. But how do I make these 5 small changes to start to, again, I put this image here of watering a plant. Like, we're talking about increasing our wellness. We want our wellness to grow. It's not just reducing stress. We want to strengthen our wellness. So how can I take some little steps, put a little water on there, on that plant, so to speak, to build up that wellness? Because that's going to protect me and help me over time. So 5 beginning strategies. The first one is not going to shock you. Move your body. So you can listen to previous webinars about the importance of exercise and how much exercise to get and all that. I think the general consensus is 150 minutes a week of moderate exercise, which is essentially 30 minutes, 5 days a week. I'm not going to throw that out there as your goal. If you're currently not exercising at all, I'm not going to say moderate walk 30 minutes, 5 days a week, because you're not going to do it. That feels impossible, right? I just want you to move your body around. Okay. So what might that look like? So it may be that you're already exercising. That's great. This is not a goal for you, right? Or it may be that you're already walking 3 days a week and you're going to add 1 day, or you're going to add 2 days. Great. Maybe you're not moving at all. Maybe you're sitting at a desk all day, or you're just really struggling to figure out how to incorporate that. And so I want you to start with like what can be really small goals. And so that may be, my daughter loves, I don't know, I keep referring to her, she's my little champion, but she loves to just literally put one song on and dance. Or like to do, if you've got kids, they have all these brain breaks on YouTube where it's like a dance battle. Like each person picks a dance move and they do it for like 1 minute. And then there's a countdown and you maybe do 10 jumping jacks. And then you do another dance move. And then it's like maybe a yoga pose for 10 seconds. And then you do another dance move. And they're really fun and interactive. And it's moving your body, but it's not like, how am I going to set aside 30 minutes to specifically do this type of exercise? So just move your body around. Movement helps with wellness. It just does. So figure out for you where you are right now and say, how can I step this up? Or maybe it's like, I'm going to try to walk 1 day a week. Or maybe it's, I'm going to, it's so hot in Alabama right now. If you're in Alabama, you know, or if you're in the South, anywhere. So it's like, I give this example that I'm like, maybe not today, but soon. Maybe I'm going to park at a faraway parking spot when I go to the grocery store, if I'm physically able to do that. And then I'm just going to get a few more extra steps in and out of the store. Or maybe if I'm at my office, twice during the day when I go to a different floor, I'm going to take the stairs instead of the elevator. So very small, measurable. I'm just going to move my body more. Practice healthy sleep habits. So as much as we have a love-hate relationship with our sleep sometimes, we do have some control over the quality of our sleep, not completely. Again, this is an area where you want to make sure you're medically cleared. So if you're really struggling with sleep, you want to make sure that you've talked to your doctor to rule out anything like sleep apnea or anything like that that could be impacting your sleep. Also, there are times in life where sleep can be harder. And so, if you've got a newborn baby, or little kids, there's only so much you can do to make sure that you have sleep. Like if your baby doesn't sleep, then you just don't sleep, right? If you're in perimenopause or menopause, hormonally, there are things that disrupt your sleep. But we do have some control over how we build healthy habits around sleep. And so those are things like making sure we're not drinking caffeine too late, putting some boundaries on screen use leading up to bedtime. common things. I think, again, there's another link here for a webinar that talks about sleep, but thinking about having a consistent bedtime, a consistent wake up time, thinking about the environment in the room. Is it cool enough? Is it dark enough? All of those sorts of things. And then just creating some healthy, we call it sleep hygiene, like creating some healthy things around sleep. Because your body has to rest and your mind has to rest. So rest is incredibly important. Physically, emotionally, everything's harder when you're tired. Everything's harder when you're tired. Your emotional regulation, your decision making, everything's harder when you're tired. And so as much as we can, we want to make sure we're pouring some energy into practicing some healthy sleep habits. And again, maybe you sleep fine now, maybe you don't. And this is one change. Maybe it's I'm not going to have that 4 p.m. cup of coffee. That's the first thing, which is a terrible thing to cut out. Am I right? But I'm going to cut out that 4 p.m. cup of coffee. Or I just recently set the goal for myself. I actually wrote it down this week that I'm not going to use any social media after 9 p.m. because I love to scroll Instagram. And I'm going to turn off my Instagram at 9 o'clock. I'm not going to look at Instagram after 9 o'clock. And that doesn't mean I'm going to sleep at 9 o'clock, but it just means I'm not going to get sucked into the Instagram vortex after 9 p.m. So think about a little goal to do there. Get organized. And so this is definitely something that looks a little bit different for each person. Like, what does get organized mean? And so for me, that looks like literal, I'll flash it on the screen. I'm a paper planner person, right? And some people, it's the list app on their phone. I'm a paper planner person. I need a to-do list. I need to prioritize ABC to-do list. I need one place where my personal life and my professional life are recorded. My appointments, the things I need to do, etc. There's a notes page, all that. I need that. But get organized. So if life feels overwhelming, you got to figure out how to kind of get hold of something. So if that is just instituting a monthly calendar where you're just writing down your kids' sports schedule, but it's never been written in one place before, or, blocking out an hour at work and saying, this hour, I'm not going to give it to anybody. No one else can talk to me. I'm going to shut my door and I'm going to spend this hour making a to-do list for this project that's been looming over me and I can't figure out where to get started. So figuring out some time to say, like, I gotta do this. I gotta get organized. And again, there's probably there's a lot of strategies out there for that as well. And it does depend a little bit about your job and your personality and where it is that you're really struggling to get organized, but put some energy into that. Learn to say no when possible. So no is a complete sentence. I know it's not a desired sentence. I know that we get pushed back when we say no. And I also recognize that there are times when we can't say no. If my boss rolls into my office and says, you were assigned this and it's your responsibility, that's typically not a time where I can just be like, no, that'd be great, wouldn't it? But that's not how it works, right? If your kid's sick, you can't just be like, no, it's not, this is not a good time for me, right? There are some things we have to do. But there are some things we can say no to. One thing I will say here, and I'll try not to get on my soapbox, but I feel really important about this. We as a society, and I see this professionally all the time, we are overcommitted, personally and professionally, and our families are overcommitted. And so we do too much. We do too much. Our schedules do too much. And I think there's a lot can be said of time. It used to be like stores were closed on Sundays and whatever. And it's like, yes, there are some pros and some cons to that. But I think it also reflects some changes, even in the last 20 years, about how I believe now there's this expectation of productivity 7 days a week. And if you're not doing that, then either you're lazy or you're doing something wrong. Okay. We do too much. Yes, I love that. If you say yes to everything, you deprive someone else from saying yes. Right. And sometimes you have to remember that a yes right now is going to end up being a no to something later. That's the other thing is if we're always saying yes up front, there's going to be something that comes eventually that maybe we really want to do, that it's a no. I'm automatically saying no to something else when I say yes. And so really assessing, if you have a partner, sitting down with your partner and assessing your family schedule, like we have to create some margin. Like, where can we create margin? And so for our family, that means there's a limit to how many nights a week we have an activity away from home. Like, we're not going to sign up, long-term for something where we are going to be gone more than this many nights a week. And each family is going to have, that's going to be a little bit different, right? And so you got to figure it out. But we have to say no. And that sometimes means too, again, I mentioned I have a daughter who's 7. That means she's not into sports. And I know, unpopular opinion, especially, here, I grew up in the South. So I know, the importance of, youth sports and church and all those responsibilities. And those are important, and every family's got to find their balance. But it's unhealthy. I mean, I'm just going to say at this point, it's unhealthy to have stuff every single night of the week in perpetuity forever. It's just unhealthy. It's unhealthy for kids. It's unhealthy for grown-ups. And so figuring out how to find a balance that works for your family and has some margin in it will make a huge difference in your stress level. So find that margin and say no where you need to say no. And then prioritize time for fun and seeing family and friends. And so I think sometimes our schedule, I think these two are related. I think sometimes our schedules are so packed that it's like trying to cram in, like, oh, okay, well, we've really been wanting to go to see that special exhibit at the Birmingham Museum of Art. Where can we squeeze in this 1 hour? And it's like, okay, what if we took a minute and we reverse that? And what if we put it in our calendar, like this week, Tuesday is Family Fun Day, and we're going to do whatever that thing is that we want to do, that it's been on the list and we've been, trying to figure it out. So prioritizing, and I would say here, scheduling time for fun and time to build your relationships, because sometimes when we're stressed, our relationships really take the hit. This may also mean if you're partnered and you've got kids and you're super busy or whatever that looks like, that you're scheduling time to spend with your partner, either if that's going out on a date, if that's just scheduling time to talk together, if that's a kind of a back porch date where the kids are asleep and you're on the back porch, but you're just talking and the TV's off and whatever that looks like. But schedule. So let's start with these 5 beginning strategies to reduce stress. And so maybe you're listening to these and you're like, hey, I'm already doing these, which you probably wouldn't be at this webinar maybe if you're doing all 5 of these. Maybe that's an assumption on my part. Or maybe you're saying, hey, I'm good in some of these areas and I want to look at some of the other areas. So if this is where we start, how do we kind of make a plan long-term to support our wellness? And so I want you to think about each of these areas and consider setting a few wellness goals in other areas. Now, I don't want your wellness plan to be so overwhelming that it adds additional stress, right? I'm not trying to increase your stress about your strategies, for reducing stress. That's not going to work, right? So maybe even just picking 2 areas. So looking at that initial assessment you did when you kind of did that score of 1 to 10 in each of these areas and saying, okay, I want to start with financial stress. My finances are really stressing me out. And I need to think about what's going to help me with that. And so that may, it'd be like, it's easy to think like, oh, well, financial stress, I'll just win the lottery or, whatever. But that's not what we're talking about. So we're like, okay, if I'm feeling really overwhelmed with my finances and I don't have a budget, maybe I'm going to start with a budget, or maybe I'm going to start with a webinar that teaches me some personal finance budgeting, money management. Maybe I'm looking and I'm saying, okay, hobbies and interests, I was like a 2. This is a mess. And so it's like, okay, maybe I'm just going to sit down for a few minutes and think about some of the things I've enjoyed over time and think like, okay, what can I do? Is it just that I love to read and I haven't read in forever and I'm going to renew my library card? Is it that I love to paint and I have all the stuff to paint and I just haven't painted in forever? Like, okay, I'm going to schedule, even if it's 30 minutes, I'm going to schedule 30 minutes on Saturday morning and I'm going to just paint for 30 minutes. I'm just going to get the canvases out and I'm going to get set up. If it's my body, like, okay, like I've been feeling, really great about my movement. I've been feeling really great about my sleep, but I'm not feeling really great about my nutrition. And so I'm going to start by maybe something I just recently did in preparation for the school year coming up, which I can't believe will be next month, is I prepped a bunch of freezer meals where you put all the raw ingredients in like a bag and you freeze the whole thing and then you thaw it and cook it in the crock pot or the Instant Pot or whatever. And it makes it where I can have fresh food, which is the way that I personally, like to feed my family. But it's already prepped now when maybe I have a little more margin. And so maybe your step is like, I'm going to buy a pack of chicken breast and I'm going to put 2 packs of, 2 Ziploc bags with chicken breast and marinate in the freezer so that when I want to eat some chicken, I will have it and it's already done. So again, assess yourself in each of those areas and think, how can I make some small steps? And so I don't want you to do the 5 things I've told you and all of these goals too. Get the 5 in hand to start, get your feet under you a little bit, and then maybe pick 2 or 3 of those areas. And then if you sustain these practices over time, I think it will help you calm the chaos a little bit. It'll help you kind of find a centered place where you're like, these are the things I know I need to do to feel well. And then if I feel well, the exterior things that cause stress are going to have a little less control. At the end of the day, I will say it again before we wrap up. If you're doing the strategies and you're doing all the things and it's still overwhelming, seek additional help. Seek it out. Find a faith leader, find a counselor, talk to a friend if you haven't, talk to a mentor if it's work-related stress. Find someone else to come alongside you in this process, because everyone's got to find, their balance for wellness. Everyone's feeling the strain, but the stress doesn't have to control you. It is possible to do some of these small changes and get to where you need to be. All right, so that's what I have. I think we have a few minutes. If there's any specific questions, I'm going to check.
Yeah, and I'm going to go ahead, and now that we've gone through everything, I'm going to toss up that same question that we began with. How stressed are you? And maybe people have changed a little bit. Hopefully that is running now. I know we landed at about 7 out of 10 for the vast majority. So it's interesting that you brought up that something as simple as, hey, where are we going for dinner, can be a stressor. I know it's something that I get asked a lot. Where are we going for lunch? And it's always my job to find something for lunch. And sometimes it can be stressful. So is there a sign of stress that is more important to watch for than the others?
That's a great question. I'm not sure that there's one sign, because I think there is a little bit of it kind of depends on the person. So, for some folks, I call it paralysis by analysis. So it's when you get frozen and you can't make a decision because it's like, what about? So you're analyzing all these things. So for some folks, when they get to that point, that's like, okay, I'm at a critical mass. Always, we want to pay attention to those physical symptoms, especially when it comes to like high heart rate and breathing and things like that, because we want to make sure medically we're where we need to be. But I think there's some reflection here in figuring out where is my tolerance level and what's my thing. So is it the making 20 mistakes in emails? Is it the, I can't sleep, I'm staying up all night long, I can't sleep. Figuring out, is it my alcohol use? Like, okay, when my alcohol use gets to this level, I know I'm unhealthy. So I think each person has to reflect on that critical point for themselves.
And since we do have a few minutes, go ahead. If you do have a question, drop it in the chat. We will definitely get to them. If somebody is always stressed, they're high strung, I guess maybe, people might call them. What can they do? It's not as simple as going to the library and decompressing.
Yeah. And I say this, I think there's some irony here, because I would say I probably would describe myself that way. My dad used to joke that I was born anxious and had a relapse. And so I think there are some components about ourselves that do pre-wire us a little bit more to stress. So our personalities and our temperaments, some of us are there. If we have a significant trauma history, our brain can actually be more reactive to stress. So there's a lot of components to that. I think one thing is it's about the self-reflection and the awareness. So I know that I personally, as a person who maybe struggles a lot with, it can be a quick trip from a 3 to a 7 for me on that scale. I need to kind of have a regular practice of assessing where I am. I need to I have a little bit of a practice on Sundays where I review the past week and look forward for the week. And I need to check in on my wellness every Sunday night. Like, I need to kind of see where I am. And so I think those of us some people, they're probably not on this webinar, but some people, this is not a problem for them. They just kind of move through their life. And unless something huge happens, they're not stressed. Everybody probably on this webinar, including myself, we don't fall into that category. And so we just have to develop a practice of assessing this all the time, and then making sure we're shoring up our intervention and before we get to that critical point. So yes, you can be predisposed and be high strung, and also you can prevent some of that from happening if you're careful about your practice.
If you look at the poll, the change was slight. People are a little less stressed after this hour. They've slipped down to about a 6 out of 10. And I did drop a link to your previous webinar that we hosted with you in the chat. So if people are interested in that, And I want to make sure I get the name of that one right, just in case. Mental health in young athletes, stress, eating disorders, and more. Even though it was geared towards a youth athlete series that we're putting together, I'm sure there are things in there that people can pluck out now and use in their lives. Dr. Watson, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be with us today.
I think there's one more question. Do I have time to answer one more?
You bet. Go for it.
Okay. So a question about what steps to help block out time to focus on yourself. I think the first thing is a very hard reflection and conversation of yourself, with yourself, to sit down and say, where am I wasting time? And a lot of times for me, and I don't say that with judgment, I say that for me, wasting time is like, where am I doom scrolling on Instagram? So like for me, I knew that I was after 9 p.m. spending too much time on social media. And so the first thing is to have kind of a hard conversation and reflection of yourself with yourself about where is there maybe more capacity in my schedule. And the second thing is what I talked about earlier, which is saying no to something. In order to say yes to more time to focus on your wellness, you're going to have to say no to something else. So once you do those two things, you'll create some margin in your schedule to be able to block that time for your wellness specifically. So that would be my suggestion for that question.
Awesome. It has been great information. We always like having you, and we'll have you back sometime. We'll figure out what else we can do with you, because your presentations are very straightforward and they resonate with the masses. So again, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much for letting me be here. Be well, everybody.
So welcome. And just a reminder, today's webinar will be uploaded onto our website by tomorrow. Once it's ready, live attendees will get an email with the replay link. And before we highlight some upcoming webinars, we just want to invite you to join our tailgate before home football games throughout the fall. We're going to be on the rooftop of Uptown Cantina 2.5 hours before kickoff every week. Single game passes are $25. Season passes are $120, so you're saving $30. Purchase your passes at alumni.uab.edu/2024 alumni tailgate. Meanwhile, here are the next 4 webinars we have scheduled for you. On Thursday, August 15th, mix things up with us during Tailgate Cocktails as we welcome Matt Smith from the Southern Kitchen and Bar and Uptown Cantina to make some the fall creations that can be perfect for your tailgate. And then join us on Tuesday, September 10th for Are the New Weight Loss Medications Right for You? Dr. Holly Wyatt and Dr. Jim Hill will explore who may or may not qualify for these medications and if they are beneficial for you. Then on Wednesday, September 18th, come back for Cybercrime 2024, the current top ways to lose your life savings. During this webinar, Gary Warner will explore critical topics we need to know about in order to avoid falling victim to cyber threats. And finally, Tuesday, October 8th, we'll be hosting Crushing Productivity Killer Strategies for Overcoming Common Pitfalls that Reduce Performance. Dr. Megan Hayes returns to not only explore this topic, but offer solutions how to overcome them. You can register for these and more, including in-person events at alumni.uab.edu/events. And as we close, let us know how we're doing. The QR code on your screen is going to take you to a short survey. Take a quick moment to share your thoughts on today's presentation and what you'd like to potentially see in the future. Once again, thanks so much for joining us on this Thursday afternoon. And as always, go Blazers.